Good morning. This is Howie, and I'm here to help you win with money. Today, I have a new episode of Bible and Money. Debt. Is it sinful or wise? Before I begin, I give my disclaimer. This is not a sermon on debt, just my viewpoints. You can always Google or YouTube. There's a lot of great content out there from pastors, scholars, and other people who love preaching on this stuff. Again, this is just my opinion. I don't represent any particular church or denomination, just what I believe from reading the scriptures. Today's verse, Proverbs 22:7. The rich rule over the poor, and the borrower is slave to the lender. The reason I picked this one, there is one man who's probably more famous about preaching this than others, and it is Dave Ramsey. He's been doing it since the beginning of his FPU, and I don't even remember what he called it before he coined it FPU, but when he was teaching this stuff in the early 80s, he was always one that used this particular verse to help people understand why he disliked debt. So in today's episode, we will talk more about this particular scripture. So the big question of the day regarding this, is it a sin to borrow money? There are many Bible verses on money, possessions, financial transactions. But I believe the Bible offers many warnings about debt, but I don't think there's ever a scripture that suggests that you're violating one of God's commands when you borrow money. Either side of it, some people say it's fine and some people say it's not. And often people may use Romans 13:8 to suggest or prove that borrowing is sinful. Bible reads, "Let no debt remain outstanding except for the continuing debt to love one another, for whoever loves others has fulfilled the law." So this verse is often used to show or suggest or prove that borrowing is sinful. I wanted to read a different verse in Deuteronomy 15:1-3, the year of canceling debt. It says, "At the end of every 7 year, you must cancel debt. This is how it's to be done," and it goes on and explains a little bit more. So I wanted to bring this up because if debt was sinful, then I find this very unusual to find this type of concept in the Old Testament where you must cancel other people's debts. Because if it was such a bad thing, then why would even God allow people to cancel debt? And for most of us, we understand bankruptcy takes a lot of laws and the 7 years to fall off your credit report. A lot of this comes from the Old Testament teaching. Further down in the same chapter of Deuteronomy, it goes on to say in verse 7, "If anyone is poor among your fellow Israelites in any of the towns of the land of the Lord your God is giving you, do not be hard-hearted or tight-fisted towards them. Rather, be open-handed and freely lend to them whatever they need. Be careful not to harbor this wicked thought. The 7th year, the year of canceling debt, is near." Wow, what is this saying? Well, if next year is the 7th year and it's time to cancel debt, for sure I don't want to lend you $50,000 today, because in less than 2 months it's the 7th year, and now you say, "But brother, the year of canceling debt is here. Kiss your 50 grand goodbye." And this is really an interesting concept of God will encourage people who can lend, right? Those who have to lend to other people, but he warns you not to keep track of, hey, or have a fear of canceling debt. So with canceling debt, so if debt is such a bad thing, why would they even encourage people to lend, right? So I find that a really interesting concept of if, yes, we understand debt is bad, but it's not necessarily sinful. And so I think this is what I wanted to talk about. And back to this. So we understand that it is not sinful to borrow, but is it wise to borrow money? Okay? Is it wise to go into debt? And that's the other side of the coin. And I have to be careful here because depending on what type of background or type of industry you come from, it may be different. There's one party or group that believe borrowing money, it's a smart thing to do. It's using leverage. You're making money using someone else's money. And others believe this is the way to make more money. You're not even using assets that you own, but you're able to generate some type of wealth from other people's money. On the other side of the coin, there are those who teach the opposite. It is never good to borrow money because it's just bad. It's sinful, which we covered in the first point. And so, which one is it? What is the right balance or what is the right answer? And it's my belief that I don't think the Bible teaches anywhere this concept of using borrowing to make more money from it. Because I think it's just the opposite. I really believe that the Bible has many warnings against that, not necessarily encouragement to say, hey, you should use leverage to multiply your wealth. And unless I'm wrong, and unless I find a new scripture or find it one day, as of right now, that's what I understand. I believe that it is not wise to borrow money. Doesn't mean it's wrong, because there are people who make money by borrowing. And I talked about that in my other videos, that is not in the Bible series, but I have other videos of many people in the real estate industry believe it's the best to always borrow money, buy a property, rent it out, get some equity in it, and then borrow more money and buy another property. And does it work? Absolutely, it could work. You can own $10 million in debt, in mortgages, and you can have a $14 million portfolio of real estate assets, which means you got a positive net worth. And so debt in that situation allows someone to be able to create a $4 million portfolio even though they leveraged everything. But again, will that work? Of course it could work, and it will work. They're making money on this difference of, or the spread, right? You borrow money, there's a cost, there's a cash flow that you're collecting in rental income, and over the long term, you're trying to make money on property value appreciating. Things can also go wrong, and then you can go on the other end, and then now you have $5 or $10 million in foreclosure, and you could owe a lot of money that way. So what is my take on debt? Where do I begin? We can start with this concept of, is there good debt versus bad debt? I don't know if I view it that particular way, because that is still subject to somebody's opinion and how you define what's good and bad. Some people would say, well, college degree should have been a good debt. There are other people who say, well, I went to college and I got a job making $14 an hour, and I can't afford to pay back all my loans. So they will say, horrible, student loan was a bad debt. For others, a mortgage is a good debt. And for somebody else who's been foreclosed on, they may have a different opinion. For other people who use credit cards and pay it off, they're like, hey, that's fine. I'm accumulating debt for 21 days. I pay it off before the end of the month, before the end of the cycle. And for other people who are enslaved by credit cards, they may have a different point of view. So I don't think my view is generally around this concept of good debt or bad debt. I think my understanding is more like a thermostat. Debt is just a measure, just like how a thermostat can measure the room temperature. It's not always going to be the same temperature. At night, the temperature drops a few degrees, and in the morning, it rises again. And I believe it can be used the same way. There's a different season in your life where you may enter debt, and then hopefully there's a different season in your life where you're out of debt. And there are times in life where you may enter it back again, like a medical emergency, and you get a hospital bill for $100,000, and you may enter debt again. So I view it as a thermostat. And because debt is just one measure or one unit of measure, you always have to look at other measures. For instance, if I'm in debt and I have a positive net worth, I can be in debt next year and still have a growing positive net worth. On the contrary, if I'm in debt and say, hey, it's okay, and let's say my net worth is minus 50,000, 5 years from now when you meet me again, I'm still in debt and I have a negative net worth of minus 100,000. As you can see, the thermostat is just one measure, net worth is another measure. And if both are still bad or in the negative, you're going the wrong direction. This does not imply that debt is bad. Debt is just one measure. So in the opposite example, if you met me now and I have debt, but I have a positive net worth of $100,000, 5 years from now when you meet me, I may have less debt, but my net worth increased to about $150,000. So in that case, would you say, well, debt is bad, shame on you? But if my net worth, right, this measure saying while I was in debt and sure there's a cost to it, my net worth grew. So I always view it from many data points. So it's a very different view of what's good or bad. Another point I want to make. If you're in debt, that suggests that you're living beyond the provision that God has provided. And I have heard this many years ago. And what that means is it's a different issue. And you got a job making $40,000, but you're not happy and you're not content. So therefore, I spend more money than I make. And so this is a concept of living beyond the provision that God has provided. Is this then really a issue of money, or is it something else? If you don't trust God in what and how your lifestyle is defined by what God has given you, then that could be a sign of something else. Is this a trust issue? Do you trust that God provided you enough to meet your needs? It reminds me of a proverb. In Proverbs, 3rd chapter, verse 5, trust in the Lord with all your heart and lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways submit to him, and he will make your path straight. Money can be a trust issue. Do I trust that God knows what he's doing with my life? Do I trust that God can use me regardless of what college I went to? Or even if I dropped out of college or high school? Do I trust that God can still use me? Do I trust that the money I make is enough? Do I believe and trust in God's plan for me, even though I may not see it today? This doesn't mean you have to settle for where you're at. What it does mean is, can you live within the parameters of what your life is today? And I'll give a quick example. Many of us can relate. When you first get out of college or your first job, you're making very little money. I remember making $5 an hour working on college campus in a computer lab. It's obvious that $5 wasn't enough to pay for much. In fact, I didn't even want to waste my money on bus money. So I rode my bicycle to school, even in the rain and snow. But I trusted that the $5 was enough. And on top of that, I even had to tithe from the little that I had. Soon after college, I was making $26,000, and it was a little bit more than what I was making before. What I did was, I didn't live beyond my means. And regardless of the season I was in, whether I got more money or less money, because that's what happens in your life. You get a job, sometimes you're blessed with making more money. Years later, you may lose that job, or for whatever reason, you have to move and you get a different job and you may make less money. And that has happened in my career. I don't always make the type of money that I think I should be making, but I have to change the way I spend my money to fit within the provision that God has given me. And when I follow those type of principles, it definitely has worked much better than doing things outside of that. So I believe it's not always a money issue. I believe it's a sign of other things in your character. Are you selfish? Now, no one wakes up and say, "Oh, I am such a selfish person. I want everybody to do what I say. I want the world to revolve around me." We may not say it that way, but I think that's what happens. I deserve this. I deserve that. I work really hard. I deserve this other thing. I want. I must have. And so those are the things that we say inside of our brain and in our hearts. And it's a selfish issue. Delay gratification is another way to explain this. Can you wait and save your money and pay cash for something you like? Or do you just say, I want to buy it now, pay later, and I'll figure it out how to pay it off? What's the difference of spending $100 today on something you think you need versus investing $100? For one person, the $100 will buy you a nice purse, pair of shoes, or maybe a great dinner out. For the other person who enjoys investing, will say, well, I'm going to invest $100 today because in 10 years, it's going to be worth twice as much. In 20 years, it's going to be worth 4 times as much. And if I wait 40 years, it can be worth 16 times as much. Because the way compounding growth works, your money will grow over time. I may want to put money away so that I can pay for something in cash in the future. The borrower has to pay back the money with interest. Here's one of the quotes that I always love. Compounding interest is the most powerful force in the universe. Those who understand it earn it. Those who don't pay it. Albert Einstein. And when you apply that to this particular verse, the borrower is someone who's always going to pay interest to the lender. The lender is someone who will always earn the compounding interest because he always has someone to make money off of. This is one reason why I invest in banks. Banks are the lender who make money off of borrowers. And if I believe in this biblical verse, I know that the borrower is slave, or the lender has a lot of control over the borrower's wealth. This guy, the borrower, has to always send money back to the lender with interest. And over time, the interest compounds. By now, you know where I stand. Is it sinful to borrow? No, it's not. Is it wise to borrow? The Bible doesn't suggest anything like that. Could you borrow? Yes, you can. Pay it back. Then switch your position. Be the person who's lending. Be the person who knows how to earn compounding interest in your favor. And then I believe you will understand this verse much better. I hope you enjoyed this episode of Bible and the Money. Please like and subscribe. I will be generating much more content like this in the future. Support my channel by looking at some of the affiliate links. Buy something from Amazon. Support me. Share these videos if you find lots of value. You can share it with your friends and your neighbors and people that you want to influence. And have a profitable day.